In this lecture, for Lesson 3, we're going to cover the vocabulary. If you'll open your book to this page, which is the beginning of Lesson 3, we're going to cover all of these words in the vocabulary, and we'll be talking about the value scale drawing, which is these instructions here, and then this is an example of the value scale on this side of the page, and we'll be talking about this. So we'll begin with the vocabulary, and so I'm going to move this out of the way. Now the first word on the vocabulary is cross-hatching. Cross-hatching, of course, is a way to make what's called value. When you started out in this class, we talked about drawing lines that were certain distance apart. Now, as the lines got closer together, actually we used lines that were 1/2 inch and went up to 2 inch. So when lines are farther apart, they tend to be indistinct in terms of creating value, and they become just a line. When you put them closer together, they are perceived to have a tone or value. In here we don't call it coloring, and we don't call it shading. Shading can get confused with shadow. So we call it value. So, and you could look at that in terms of maybe a value of gray, for instance. Now you notice as you perceive these lines closer together, it tends to begin to make a shape. Because the lines are starting to appear closer together, they start to join together visually. So you can see where it now becomes a square, more or less, which is actually a shape. The edge of this shape up here is what's called an implied line. You're actually implying that there is a somewhat of a straight line edge here. So that's one of your other terms, is implied line, which is defined by any edge of a plane or shape that can be defined in any way other than just using a line. And that's how this is done. You can also do that with a value, for instance. Value meaning you could simply have a value like this, and this value being separate from this value, which is white, creates a line. Now cross-hatching, this can be excuse me, this can be determined to be a what they call hatching sometimes. Putting lines close together. You can do this in a mechanical way, and some of these are fairly self-explanatory, but sometimes it's good to see just what some of these experimental things can do. Now this can be called cross-hatching, although it's very predictable. But you notice the more cross-hatching that I do on here, the darker the shape becomes. Now most people don't draw this way. If you want to just make a normal cross-hatching in a shape like this, maybe something like this. And part of the reason for cross-hatching is that it's fairly difficult. You see, since I'm right-handed, my average or normal stroke is going to be this way. Okay? Now if you're left-handed, which I'm not, it may go this way. And you might find, that being ambidextrous in drawing is kind of handy, although I don't think that I have the control that I have with my right hand. But depending on the hand you use, you have a natural mark. And when you have a natural mark stroke like that, it's difficult to get the edges clean. So that's where cross-hatching would come in, because what happens then is you have to actually go to the edges and end up doing shorter strokes or strokes of a different type in order to clean up the edges. Okay? So cross-hatching can mean a lot of different things. A random cross-hatching, which I do a lot, is actually just random. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, any way you can get a value is okay. Okay, one of the next things we want to talk about, a couple of the terms we have, figure-ground relationship, picture plane. So I want to review a couple things that we did in the last lesson. And one of those was, and I'm going to use the edge of this paper here. And the first thing that we talked about in the last lesson was a border. And now if I was drawing a border on this paper, I would draw it, and it would be about an inch away. I would draw a line like this, and we talked about that. So I'm just going to end this here, even though the paper continues, okay? Now these are all terms, okay? And you should have went through your quiz, which covered what a border was. And now you have another term for today in lesson 3, which is a picture plane. So now you have a picture plane, which is what this is. So I'm going to lightly shade this picture plane. So this whole area is called a plane inside of this border. This is the area that you use to draw in. Now one of the reasons that a border is important is because you have other terms that we really don't use in here, and they use in 2D design. One of them is called cropping, which means you might want to draw something that's not completely in the picture plane. You might want to think of that as a viewfinder, or what you might see on your smartphone or on a digital camera. There is a limited area of viewing on those devices. And that limited area of viewing is your viewfinder, and in this case, the picture plane. And so as an artist, you are composing what you want to see by drawing a border. So there's a lot of different names here for that. So now you have the border, and I'll label them in a minute. You have your border here. This. You have the picture plane. And that is this entire area in here. Now, if you want to make a, let's say, we want to make a shape on the picture plane. So I'm going to make a generic shape. I don't want to make a square. I'm making too many squares. I'm going to make a, what is this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-sided shape. Now, this is called a shape. Now, you know, artists have different terms that, you know, are important because you want to communicate to people what you're talking about. Now, a shape is anything enclosed by a linear border. A shape can also be defined not by a line, but by a different, additional or different value. So a shape, which is also called a plane, and a plane is a two-dimensional shape. So those are interchangeable words. So even though you have picture plane, you also can use the word plane, or you can interchange that with the word shape. Now, as you talk about design elements and you talk about artwork and other classes, what you're really talking about is using an artist vocabulary. So everyone is on the same page with all these terms. It's like talking about a color and you say, well, that's a scarlet red, for instance, as opposed to apple red. Because apple red, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of apples, right? And so all kinds of apples have a different kind of red. So all you're talking about is a standard kind of vocabulary so people can communicate. Okay, now this is also a shape, but it's defined in a different way. It's defined by a value that is different from another value. Okay, so additionally what you have here, you have now this shape in the picture plane is now a picture. And so this is called a figure. And a figure is also a positive shape. I'll just put a plus sign here. And we talked about that in the last class. Ground is also, you can think of it as background. And also, that is the negative shape. So these are interchangeable words: figure and positive shape, ground and negative shape. So we've got, okay, so just recap what happened here is we have the border, picture plane, positive negative space, figure, ground, and value. Okay, now I want to talk about the other three things we have on here is value gradation, value reversal, and value scale. So a value gradation, it's going to be a little difficult to draw a value gradation. First of all, there's a continuous, what they call a value gradation, or there's a step value gradation. So, and I have a couple tricks. Well, I don't know if it's really a trick, but what I want to do is show you a couple things simultaneously here. So I'm going to use the straight edge. Now, I talked to you last time about this pencil. Now, this is a 4B, and I've got this guy really wore down. See that? And that's a little too far. So I got a new one. Now, first thing I'm going to do with a pencil like this when I want a gradation is I need to get the pencil warmed up. I want to get rid of some of this sharp edge to it. So I got a little bit of an edge, so I know what I'm working with. Okay. Now, a value gradation, and I did this when I showed you how to use these pencils. A value gradation is basically a change of pressure with one pencil. It could be multiple pencils, where you go from dark to light. Now, the reason that I use the straight edge is because I want to illustrate a clearer idea about implied line. This is a great implied line here. Okay? One of the other, I'm going to turn this upside down for a minute. Well, maybe not. Yes, I'll have to, because I'm right-handed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to repeat this gradation of value. I want to make sure I get it in the right spot here. And I'm going to do the opposite. Now that's called a value reversal. Now a value reversal, this is the very simplest demonstration of a value reversal. Although a value reversal can mean values reversing in any direction or any section of that value reversal, whether it's a really dark end going to the middle or the middle going to the light or whatever. I'm just doing a complete reversal of this. Now, what's interesting about this is as you can see, this implied line is very strong because your eye feels like the line continues in here when in fact the line has disappeared. You know, one of the ideas about implied line is that in art, you never want to complete the entire image. You want to have the image and leave some of that up to the viewer. Now this little item here, which I have made up here, is not a cropping tool or a, you might have, it's similar to a viewfinder. But the thing about it is the mechanics of your eye is such that you see this as a line. But if you see what happens when I do this, you see how almost all of that disappears. I've got a few inconsistencies right here. But the point is that when you isolate, this is a little isolation window, they call those. And what it does is it takes the cones of your eye and they're picking up other information outside of what you're actually looking at and trying to compensate for you. So what this does for artists is it helps you to see, you say, oh yeah, well it's different all the way down there. Well, it's not, you see. And in some cases, if I was to make it even smaller, you can see where there's even less of a differentiation. And so the idea is this is a very handy tool, and you can make yourself one of these to work on the value scale. Okay, so we've a value. Now we'll move to a value scale, which is the last word in this vocabulary. Now I'm going back to the book here. So this is a student example of a vocabulary. Student example of a value scale. Here's the value scale layout, which is described right here. This verbiage here simply is described here in a mechanics form. So this is not to scale. This is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. Well, it's actually an 8 by 12 piece of paper. It's not to scale. This is going to be enlarged using a ruler on a full piece of paper. A full piece of paper will be your sketch pad. So I'm going to move this out of the way. And here's your full sketch pad. I don't know how much. I'm going to move it up and down to show you. We're in the middle of a 18 by 24, which is 18 wide, right? 24 inches tall piece of paper. Inside of that, you'll be using a ruler to make 2-inch squares starting 2 inches from the top of the paper. The top of the paper right here is about the top of the paper on this pad. 2 inches down is about here. You can use a ruler. That corresponds to this. 2 inches wide is going to be about this wide, and a 2-inch square will look about like this. So that's this first square on a big piece of paper. So you then make 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 2-inch squares is 20 inches. So that leaves a 2-inch margin at the top, and if you were to take them all the way to the bottom, you'd have a 2-inch margin at the bottom. So you end up with this large piece of paper with 2-inch squares, and it's about 8 inches from the edge of the paper each way, because 8 and 8 is 16, and 2 is 18, and that's how wide the paper is. So this is a layout that's verbally described right here, right here. So now, just briefly, in a couple minutes I have, I just want to show you how to approach a value scale. So I'm going to put this. Generally, what you would do is use a HB pencil. I'm going to quickly sketch these out. You can use a ruler. Okay, and we're going to go down to the